our last text is one of the last texts. It's in Revelation 21 and 22. So I'll be reading it here in just a second, but just recap, we've been on this journey called Advent, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite holidays because for me it's one of the most realistic of the holidays. I mean, I think holidays we tend to see as like a break from real life, which is needed sometimes. You know, you want to have, life is heavy, you want to have celebration, you want to have kind of spaces of joy that are not just kind of in the weeds of it. But Advent is actually sort of an in the weeds holiday because it's, by virtue, it's a season of waiting. So it's not a season of arriving, it's a season of arrival. You're preparing and waiting for Jesus to show up in our lives in profound ways. And in the meantime, you sit in your very real lives and you hold on to hope. And what that means is you don't grasp for other hopes. You don't settle for coping mechanisms. You don't settle for the easy things. Instead, you wait patiently for the one that can satisfy. And so Advent is a very realistic, it's a very clear-eyed season, and I appreciate that because it's all about Jesus showing up in our lives as they are. And we're going to talk about that, that kind of direction of Jesus showing up in our lives with hope, peace, joy, and love in the real world where we exist. Because I think oftentimes we tend to think of it the other way around, where Jesus is going to take us out of this world into a place of hope, peace, joy, and love. But the reality is the Christmas story says, no. He comes into the real stuff. There's not a place kind of differentiated where that stuff doesn't exist. He actually steps into the real stuff and by his presence transforms the real stuff into hope, peace, joy, and love. He makes beautiful things out of mess, you know. He trades you the broken stuff that we have for the beauty that he has. And I just think that sort of directionality is important, of Jesus showing up in our world, not pulling us out into his. And we're going to talk more about that in the text for tonight, but that's what Advent's about. It's about sitting in this waiting. And we've been journeying through the book of Revelation, kind of with these snapshots of Jesus that help us understand the baby in the manger more. Because I think for me, Revelation is it's a bizarre, there are some bizarre parallels to the Christmas story itself. Uh-oh. Everything okay back there? Oh, okay. There's some bizarre parallels to the Christmas story itself, where you have, at Christmas, Jesus shows up for the first time. At Revelation, we see him kind of coming again. And in both spaces right before that, his people are waiting. His people are waiting for him to show up. And we've seen these kind of glimpses of him in Revelation, but the glimpses have always been sort of anticipatory. You know, it's been Jesus kind of as the Son of Man standing among the churches. And we haven't talked a ton about this, but the situation in the churches at the time that Revelation was being written was really desperate. They were in the Roman Empire. They were being persecuted. Some of them were being executed. It's a really difficult time. And so they got a vision of Jesus standing in the middle of the churches telling them, do not be afraid. And that was comforting, but it's comforting in the sense of like, keep holding on to hope. One day I'm going to make all this right, you know? And then we see the same thing in Revelation 4 and 5, where he's the conquering lion who is the slain lamb. He's shown us that he has made a way through his blood. It says he has made us a kingdom and priests for his God, and we will reign with him forever. Okay, so there's another sort of anticipatory thing. One day, because of what he's done, you will reign with him. You will inherit everything that he's promised. And in Revelation 19, again, we see the same thing. We see this picture of the warrior, the rider on the white horse, whose name is faithful and true, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, all the different pictures that we saw. And again, there's this sense of one day, he is going to, once and for all, defeat the powers of evil and set everything back to right. And so all these pictures are pictures of hope. They're pictures of like, to the church, they're saying, just hold on. Just hold on. This is all going to end well. He will win. And we see that at the very end. If we skip all the way to the last couple of words of Revelation, it's this beautiful scene where twice Jesus cries out to the church, says, I'm coming. In the very end of Revelation, I'm coming. And twice the church responds, come, Lord Jesus. Like this sense of longing, like any time now. And that's what Christmas is supposed to be. As we celebrate Christmas, as people who were celebrating an event that happened, but we're looking forward to something that is going to happen. So we kind of live between these arrivals. And so we're supposed to put ourselves in the position of that longing and that waiting as we anticipate the celebration of his first arrival. We're also putting our hearts in a position of longing for his second arrival when he sets everything back to right again. And with that said, then, the text I want to read today is kind of like Christmas morning. It's kind of like we've had this feeling of longing. We've had this feeling of like something really good is going to happen. We're almost here, just hold out hope. And then Revelation 21 breaks on us like Christmas morning. And you guys know the feeling. Maybe you don't get it as much when you're an adult, but when you're a kid, you know the feeling. You know, you walk downstairs or, you know, and suddenly the tree there's gifts everywhere, or there's the smell of something baking that reminds you of Christmas. Or if you grew up in a place where there's actual seasons, you walk outside and there's a fresh coat of snow on the ground and it's like everything is new. And that's what this text is. So Revelation 21 verse 1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. And the first earth had passed away and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all of this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all the liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. We'll talk about all that in a second. I'm reading a big chunk here, by the way, so just bear with me. This next part's going to get a little technical, but it's all good. One of the 7 angels, who had 7 bowls full of 7 last plagues, came to me and said, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. It had great high walls with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates. And on the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There are 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The walls of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were written the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The angel who talked with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city, its gates and its walls. The city was laid out like a square, as long as it was wide. He measured the city with the rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length, and as wide and high as it is long. The angel measured the wall using human measurements, and it was 144 cubits thick. The wall was made of jasper, the city of pure gold, and as pure as glass. The foundation of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth ruby, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th turquoise, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each made of a single pearl, and the street of the city was of gold, pure as transparent glass. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city doesn't need sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Nothing impure will ever enter it, nor will anyone who does anything shameful and deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. And the angel showed me a river of water, of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Down the middle of the great streets, flowing from the throne of God down the middle of the great street of the city. On either side of the river there stood a tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be their city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord their God will give them light, and they will reign with him forever and ever. All right, so that's kind of, since we're not going to be together on Christmas morning, that's our Christmas morning text. That's the big payoff. This is what happens when all of this is finally made new. And this picture is really, really beautiful. But I want I want to point out a couple things about the image, and then we'll kind of fixate or focus on the character at the middle of the whole thing. But first thing to point out here is he talks about a new heaven and a new earth. And I just want to be very clear with that language. He's talking about a new earth here, which means that there is something to be said about this idea of resurrection or the renewal of what already exists. So I say that because I grew up in a Christian tradition that was sort of all about getting out of the earth and into this sort of space, this heavenly space where, God is, and our sort of souls will one day go to be with him in heaven. And that's the great hope of the scripture. But if you read both the Old Testament and specifically here, and if you read Paul carefully as well, it seems like that's not the case. Like the case is not that our hope is to get out of here. The hope is that God's going to redeem and renew all of this. And I think somewhere along the lines, courtesy of Greek philosophy, we got this idea that sort of physical stuff is supposed to be temporary and fragile and somewhat flawed, and that the spiritual stuff is the real stuff, That's the good stuff. But the fact of the matter is the Bible talks about it all as good stuff. That God created the world itself in all of its physicality, including the people in it, and that his goal has never been to abandon that, but to redeem and refresh it. And so there's a new earth that accompanies the new heaven. And I think it's really important to understand that it involves the physical world, our physical bodies, and the redemption of creation, not just the abandoning of creation. Because that's the picture that we have here. It says the first heaven and first earth had passed away, but that doesn't mean that it's been destroyed. It means instead that God has done something to renew it. We see here in Revelation 21 the first words that are spoken by God the Father. It says, "Then I heard from him on the throne." And what does he say? He says, "I am making all things new." He does not say, "I am making a bunch of new things." He says, "I am making all things new," that there's a sense of renewal. And when you see, and we'll talk about this New Jerusalem here in a second, but when we see the New Jerusalem, we notice it doesn't actually inhabit the entirety of the new earth. It's just a piece of it. And there seem to be things outside of the New Jerusalem that the New Jerusalem then exists to bring renewal to. Because he talks about the fact that there's healing of the nations that will be ongoing once the new earth is created. Interesting thought we'll kind of come back to. But what I'm trying to say here is he's not destroying and starting over. He is instead renewing the earth. This is not a destruction story, it's a redemption story. And if you look at the new earth, there's a couple of key features here that we'll notice right off the bat. One of them is no sea, which stresses everybody out who lives in Southern California. Because everybody likes walks on the beach or surfing, whatever else. We're not supposed to fixate on the images too much, so much as the feelings. And maybe for some of you, the sea is a really beautiful and lovely and peaceful and tranquil thing. But if you're my daughter here, Marta, does not love the ocean, there's a reason for that. It's because the ocean's a scary place as well. And any of you who have been in the ocean in any sort of significant way, whether it's been in a boat during a storm or been out on a surfboard thinking about what might be underneath you, or been just flattened by a 6-foot wave, realizing that the sheer power of just that much water, will realize that the sea is also a scary thing. And for most people in the ancient world, that was the predominant feeling you had around the ocean, was this sort of deep respect, because you have no idea what's happening in there. And there's a reason that humanity is filled with centuries and centuries of stories of sea monsters and things lurking in the deep, because we just don't know. It's all unknown. And so the sea in the Bible always represents chaos. From all the way back to Genesis 1, right? It says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the deep, right? And then it's out of this kind of deep that he brings order. That's the picture that we see in Genesis. So what we're seeing here is not a world without an ocean. We're seeing a world without chaos, a world without destructive force. And no more night as well. So no sea and no night. And what does the night represent? Fear. It's darkness. It's a lot of people are scared of the dark. It's probably one of the most common phobias, right? Because it's the unknown. And so what God is saying here, in this new earth, there's no sea and no night. In other words, there's nothing to fear. When God's reign is completely realized on earth, the primary thing at the center of his reign is love. And the Bible is clear that perfect love casts out fear. So when love reigns, fear goes. When there's nothing to challenge the reign of God on earth, now there's nothing to fear. And that's not just trying to pat yourself on the back and say don't be afraid anymore. It's legitimately, you have no reason to fear anymore. There's nothing that can harm you, nothing that can hurt you. And just imagine that. Put those two pictures together. Put the picture of new earth, so this place renewed, without brokenness, without death, without sin, without decay, and therefore with God in complete control, no evil, nothing out to destroy you. You have no longer anything to fear. Imagine being able to navigate new earth without fear. To live in, just imagine being able to live in the world as it is without fear. That's the picture. That's a big picture of hope that we have here. It reminds me of Heather and I lived in England for a year. And we were there for a couple weeks, and some friends of ours that we're all living together at this kind of this manor out in the countryside. And one of them, this British guy, said, one night we're gonna have a little campfire in the woods and just get to know each other a bit. So we go out in the woods back behind the manor, and he has lit a campfire just on the ground. He hasn't dug a little hole or hasn't built a little thing with rocks around it to avoid setting stuff on fire. And I remember, I grew up in settings like this where you have to be very careful with fire in the woods. And I'm like, what do you, Al, his name was Al. I was like, Al, what are you doing? And he just looked at me and he goes, it rains here 200 or 300 days a year. What do you think is going to happen? You literally can't light the trees on fire. It's impossible, So when we were leaving, I'm like, do we need to do something? He just left the fire, literally just left the fire burning there on the ground. And it was fine. Everything is soaked and saturated, So, and I remember that night having this conversation with him about, this is so bizarre. This is really weird. And he goes, it's not just that. He goes, we have no poisonous snakes on this island. There are no carnivorous animals that hunt human beings. The only things you're going to find is in cities are going to be dogs and people you have to watch out for. But it's just so different from where I grew up, where it's okay, you've got grizzly bears and mountain lions and rattlesnakes and on and on, and all the stuff you got to be afraid of. And I just remember thinking in that moment, just sitting there in the woods, there's nothing that's going to hurt me out here. I can't even light the ground on fire, And it was just such a bizarre feeling of safety and warmth of I could just go for a walk through the woods and be fine. How strange is that? But imagine, that's just a small snapshot of what we have here. No sea, no darkness, no fear. Perfect love has driven out anything that can harm the creation that God loves so much. Okay, so that's sort of new earth. But then the picture fixates on this new Jerusalem, which is really interesting. We have this picture of a city descending from heaven, okay? And it's painted in really lovely language. It's got all these gems and gold and lots of 12s or multiples of 12s, 12,000 stadia across by 12,000 stadia high. You multiply the whole thing out and, there's 144,000. 12s are big images for God. We have 12 tribes. We have 12 apostles. This is all really important stuff. But at the end of the day, you realize that what the New Jerusalem represents is the people of God. Okay, we have the gates represent the 12 tribes. There's a continuity with the Old Testament story. The foundations represent the apostles, which is the continuity with the New Testament story. So taken as a whole, this city represents the universal people of God throughout time and space. And if you think about it, you'll hear stats occasionally of there are 2 billion people on earth that are Christian. It's well, that's now. But think about it. Over the course of the last 2,000 years, that number could be, 15 billion. And you begin to think about the church not just through space, but through time and space, as this eternal people of God, of people who've been faithful to the Lamb in all sorts of circumstances, some like ours and some unlike ours. And that's what the New Jerusalem represents. They come descending from heaven as a bride adorned for her groom. It's a really beautiful picture. But the angel and John, they go to measure this thing, which I can't imagine how long it would take to measure something that's 12,000 stadia across with a gold rod. So there's got to be some figurative language here. But 12,000 stadia, just so is roughly 1,500 miles. So the New Jerusalem is 1,500 miles square, not square miles, but 1,500 miles across and across this way. And then 1,500 miles high as well, which is interesting. It comes as a picture of a cube. And again, we're not supposed to get too hung up on this. Other than to notice that 1,500 miles across, I think it equates to roughly, I think it's a little over 2 million square miles, is essentially the size of the Roman Empire. So there's kind of, or the known world to people who are would have been John's readers. So there is kind of a statement being made here that when the New Jerusalem descends, it will take over. That the empire that seems so dominant, that seems like it is absolutely unbeatable, will one day be replaced by the kingdom of the Lamb. So the New Jerusalem, the new city, will settle and will be the force on earth, which is really beautiful because it's a very different kind of force as we've seen. And 1,500 miles high. Again, I don't know what to do with that entirely other than to say it reaches up and spans between heaven and earth. So there's kind of this sense of interconnectivity, okay, between the new heaven and the new earth, where they're no longer separated by some sort of a barrier, but are now one space, because 1,500 miles would presumably get us fairly high into space. So anyway, but what I want to notice here, I'm getting kind of in the weeds of some of the details of this story. What I want to notice here is, like I said at the beginning, is the directionality of the city. It's not ascending from earth into heaven, it's descending from heaven to earth. So here we have a picture of the people of God descending from heaven to earth, where they meet the Lamb who has now conquered on earth, okay? Because that's what all of Revelation has been. It's been about this war here in this space, not in the heavenlies, but in this space. It's been kind of this conflict between the forces of the dragon and the beasts and the Lamb himself. And he has won the war, and it's now safe for his people to come and join him, where they'll reign with him forever. So his people descend from heaven to meet with the Lamb as a bride meeting with her groom. And that's an interesting picture, because we would tend to think of it as the other way around, right? Where Jesus is now coming to take his people up into heaven with him, but that's not at all the picture that's being painted. He has created a space here for them to reign with him on this earth. Now, why are they descending? Why aren't they on earth already? And the answer, I think, comes from Paul in Colossians, when he says, when you come to Jesus, he says, you die, and your identity becomes hidden with God in Christ. And then he says, and when Christ, who is our life, appears, we also will appear with him in glory. So there's this sense of, like, when we give our lives to him, our identity is now hidden with him. There's the truest part of ourself is heavenly. Our citizenship is heavenly and not fully realized yet. So we have this kind of heavenly citizenship that is ours. It's guaranteed, it's sealed by the Holy Spirit, but it's never been fully received until he comes again. And when he comes, then our full life appears with him. And so it's almost this picture of the full lives of all these people who have been hidden in him throughout the ages, now coming, and they're being restored to their full humanity, their full purpose. I know this is a very, like, kind of big, abstract picture, but does that make sense? It's when Paul talks in Romans about creation longing for the children of God to be revealed, that's what he's talking about. That God created these people with this authority and this power and this capacity to reign here with him as he would. And then that's all lost through sin. But when Jesus shows up, he begins to redeem people, and he gives them back some of that identity, and he stores the rest away on deposit for when he comes back. And when he comes back and he restores the earth, that deposit now comes and fills all of his people again, and they become once again who they were made to be. Their full humanity, restored to their full purpose and their full vocation. And that's what the New Jerusalem represents. It represents the people of God restored to their full vocation as he created us, with all of the marks of sin, with the stuff that we've done, with the stuff that's been done to us, is all washed away and is now a bride prepared for her groom. Does that make sense? It's a powerful image. It takes a lot of talking to get there. I hope I didn't lose it in the talking. But again, coming down to return us to the earth. So this is not a picture of earth. This is the opposite of what I was taught about Revelation. This is not a picture of earth being evacuated for heaven. This is a picture of heaven invading earth. And when Jesus says in the Gospels, I'm coming like a thief in the night, we've tended to think that that means a thief in the night coming to steal all of the good people out of the earth and leave all the bad people with all of their wickedness and all of their destruction behind. But that's not the picture at all. The picture of Jesus coming like a thief in the night, he's coming to steal the wickedness and the destruction. He's coming to steal all of the pain and the brokenness and take it away once and for all and leave in its place, this place, new, and all of us new, to enjoy and reign with him. So, and the way this all works is through presence, okay? That's the big thing that we want to camp out on, is how does all this work? How is this New Jerusalem function? How is fear gone? How is night gone? How is chaos gone? And the answer is really simple. It's because the Lamb is there. The one at the center of the throne and the Lamb are there. There's this picture that God is once again living among his people. That's how Revelation 21 starts. He shouts out, I am here. The dwelling place of God is now among his people. And that's the hope of Scripture from the book of Genesis onward. Genesis 1, the great thing about the Garden of Eden was that Adam and Eve got to be there with God. They got to walk with him and talk with him and be with him. In Exodus, when he delivers the people from slavery in Egypt, he then takes them out into the wilderness where he has them build a tabernacle, a house, where he can live among his people. And in Exodus, they prove right off the bat that they're unworthy, that they're unclean to have God live with them. And the problem throughout the entire Old Testament is how can a holy God dwell among an unholy people? And then in the book of John, the passage we just read a second ago, he shows up and it says he dwells among us. And so on Christmas, we celebrate God coming and living among us for a period of time that we read about in the Gospels, and all of us long to. I wish I could have been there when Jesus was here, you know? And what we see in this text is we get that incarnation forever. That's what it says. It says God is dwelling among his people. That's the same word that John used to describe Jesus showing up on Christmas. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The dwelling of God is now among his people. So what happens here in this picture is a perpetual Christmas. It's his presence, his incarnation is among us forever, and we enjoy his presence forever. What Jesus did for us on Christmas morning, God is preparing to do for us perpetually. And when that happens, notice the results of his presence it's profound. It says he's going to wipe away every tear. So there is comfort for every pain. There is no pain that he will not comfort when he shows up. There's restoration for every loss. Anything that's been lost will be restored. There's abundant life for those who long for it. Notice at this point he has destroyed death. Death is no longer an option for his people. And now they have access to drink freely from the spring of life. Anybody who wants to come and drink life can have it. This is right out of John chapter 4. Jesus offers it to the Samaritan woman. Come and drink. And now he offers to any who want it. You start to put it in these terms, it sounds like the conversation we were having around the Sermon on the Mount, right? Where Jesus is promising all these people, when I show up, when my kingdom comes, this is what's available to you. It says the end of the curse, that the curse is broken. There is no more decay. There is no more sin or brokenness. They have a new name, his name tattooed on their foreheads, which means identity. You will know who you are. We all know that one of the biggest things that is damaged when sin enters the world is our sense of self. And when we lose the sense of self, that's where sin comes from. Sin isn't primary, it's a secondary action. It comes out of insecurity. But they're going to have his name literally written on their foreheads so that every time you look at yourself in a mirror or at one another, you're going to know who you are and who they are. It says we'll reign with him like we were made to. It says there's an eternal light in the city, or an end of fear. That the city is perpetually lit by the Lamb. So much so that the gates are always open. I love that. Did you notice that feature? The gates are always open because there's no night in the city. So what happens when there's an end of fear is it creates an environment of radical hospitality. There's nothing out here I have to be afraid of. Instead, now our doors are open. And this is what I think is interesting. And I haven't read a lot of people who are working through the implications of this, but it's clear in this text that there are gates and that there are people outside the gates of the city. I don't know what to do with this in our sort of modern like heaven and hell dichotomy where it's like this is heaven and these people are in hell and that's all there is to it. But notice what happens here is we have these gates open and people from the outside, it says the kings of the earth are bringing their tributes now into the presence of the Lamb, that they are coming to this city to meet. In other words, they are coming to the people of God. If the city is the people of God, they are coming to the people of God who are no longer afraid, who are no longer under a curse, who are now fully awakened, fully alive to be the people they were made to be. And they are coming to the people of God to experience their radical hospitality and the presence of God among them, as it was always supposed to be. And it says that there's this river that flows down the center of the city, from the throne and from the Lamb. So it's like out of the presence of the Lamb springs this river. And the river gives birth to, on either side of the river, to the trees of life, which is fascinating because if you read the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve sinned, They get thrown out of the garden because they were no longer allowed to have access to the tree of life. Because if they had access to it, they could keep eating from the tree of life and keep living. But now they just grow throughout the city. And it says, the assumption then would be that the people of God enjoy the tree of life as they were always supposed to, because death is no more. But notice that the tree of life also produces leaves, not just fruit, but leaves. And that from the leaves are made a medicine that is for the healing of the nations. I just think that's so fascinating. What if this picture here isn't the end, but a new beginning? That what's happening here is Jesus comes and he awakens his people. He restores us to our true identity, our true vocation. He takes away the things that have been killing us and breaking us, and then he puts us in a I don't want to get too literal here, but in a cube the size of the Roman Empire on a new earth, and says, now with me at your center, we can reign over this place in such a way that will bring about the renewal of the nations. So you actually, what I guess I'm trying to say is, what if there's mission in the new earth that springs from the new Jerusalem, that springs from the presence of the Lamb? And we have a chance now to participate with him in the healing of the nations, the healing of the world. I think that's the picture that's here. And again, I'm sure that there are plenty of circles in the church that would label this as heresy outright, but I'm pretty sure that's what's happening here, is we have a chance now, fully human, to reign with Jesus on earth without fear, and to see things change. And all of this, I don't want to lose sight of the fact, there's a lot of big and grand language, but to lose sight of the fact that this is a wedding. Okay, this is portrayed as a wedding. The New Jerusalem comes out of heaven as a bride for a groom, and that makes this a love story. Or if you want to put it in Shakespearean language, it's a comedy. I think a lot of us look at the world as a tragedy. You know, the difference between, if you've ever studied Shakespeare, at the end of a tragedy, everybody dies. At the end of a comedy, everybody gets married. This is a comedy. I don't mean it's funny or ridiculous. I mean, it ends in a wedding. It doesn't end in chaos and destruction, as we so often think the book of Revelation does. It doesn't. It's a happy story. It's a story of love, where love wins, and the day is saved by the Lamb. So I say all that to say that's honestly, like, that's what's coming for us. And that's really what Christmas is all about. I know it sounds high and lofty, but that's what the baby in the manger came to do. That's who we've been talking about this entire time. He came to invite us into this heavenly city, to make this our identity, and to make this our inheritance and our future. And I just want to kind of say two things in the middle of that big picture. One is that this is, in fact, our future. This is our inheritance. This is who we are. So without in any way minimizing the stuff that anybody's going through, I want you to have hope this Christmas season. Okay? I know for many, in one way or another, life is difficult. It's got its challenges. And this doesn't minimize any of that. God is not pretending like your tears didn't exist. He is comforting them directly, which means he's addressing them directly. So I guess I say to everyone who has felt the weight of life in this year, that as we approach Christmas, this is your future. This is your story, and it's true. And this is the comfort that God gave to his churches that were suffering, and I think it's the comfort he still gives to his church, wherever we happen to find ourselves. So this is Christmas morning. My hope is that when you wake up on Christmas morning, that there will be something of this ringing in your head. But the second thing I want to say is, it's clear too that this is not just our future identity, but our identity now. That's actually kind of the whole name of our church is based on that idea, right? Citizens. That we are currently citizens of this New Jerusalem. And we have not yet fully received the full inheritance and rights of citizenship, because not all of this has come to pass just yet. But that doesn't mean that we're not citizens, and that doesn't mean that we can't live like we are now. Which means both to be people of hope, people who look forward to and hold on to this vision, but also people who can live then in a way that sees this stuff begin to happen in us, who can live in a way that bring about the healing of the nations. I know it sounds massive and global. It doesn't have to. You don't have to think global when I say that. The nations could just as easily be your family. So, if you are in fact a citizen of the heavenly, this New Jerusalem, A person for whom one day fear will not make any sense, insecurity won't make any sense, will know who you fully are, and that is available to you in part through the Holy Spirit now, then how do you live? How do you live with that? Like with that reality? If you don't have to be afraid, then you don't have to kind of try to secure yourself. You're free to be, with everything you have, radically generous to the people around you. If you don't have to be insecure because you know your identity, you know who, the name that is written on your forehead, even though you can't see it just yet, but you know, then you don't have to fight to be right. You don't have to win. You can forgive. You can let go of things that have hurt you because you don't have to win this to be you. There are all sorts of ways that this picture, in our personal life, but even on a bigger scale, what would it look like then to find ourselves as a New Jerusalem living in a real modern city of Costa Mesa or Huntington Beach or whatever else? And how can then the New Jerusalem that is the Church of Christ in this city begin to see flowing out of this place? You know, I mean, let's just get really granular here. What would it look like if in our gathering, the Lamb is at the center and he's seated on the throne, and out of his throne is flowing a river that is flowing with blessing to the nations. And we're already in some way drinking from that river, and we're already in some way living in that city, then what does it look like for that to flow out the doors of this place and into the cities where we find ourselves? How can we begin to live out this vision now? So I say all that to say it's kind of encouragement and challenge. Be encouraged wherever we are. This is where God is leading us, and this is what's available to us now. And so how do we live like it and act like it's true?